of the webinar series. Today's webinar is the ABCs of the FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act in Wineries, by Dr. Stephanie Gross. She's a research associate in the Midwest Grape and Wine Industry Institute at Iowa State University. She specializes in industrial microbiology, bioprocess engineering, and fermentation science. Remember that as a participant in today's webinar, you will not have the ability to speak. If you're having any technical difficulties, please type a note in the chat pod over on the right side of your screen, and I'll do what I can to help. If you have questions, please type those in the chat pod as well. We're going to take a break about midway through the webinar to address some questions, and then we'll have more time at the end as well. So, Stephanie, with that, I'm going to let you take over and begin your presentation.
Thank you, Chrislyn, for the introduction. And I would like to welcome everybody to the presentation today. And I'd like to thank the Northern Grapes Project for giving me the opportunity to kick off this season's webinar. Now, today, I'm going to be, as Chris pointed out, I'm going to be talking about the ABCs of the FSMA. And what this really is how the Food Safety Modernization Act affects wineries and what you guys need to know. And basically what this presentation is going to be a general overview of the law and its impact on wine industry. And it's not meant to be all-inclusive because, as we all know, laws change all the time. But to give you a little idea of my background and experience with food safety, I got my master's and PhD in industrial microbiology. And during that time, I designed and implemented a QA/QC program for a brewery. So I've had experience in the alcoholic beverage industry with quality assurance and quality control. In my current position as a research associate for the Midwest Grape and Wine Industry Institute at Iowa State, I have the opportunity to perform sanitation reviews for wineries and also offer custom troubleshooting. In today's presentation, the first thing I'm going to do is provide you an overview with the law, the Food Safety Modernization Act, what it means, and what are the guidelines set forth. Then we're going to go into how does the Food Safety Modernization Act affect wineries? What are the requirements that wineries have to adhere to? Then we'll discuss what to expect out of an FDA inspection and what are good manufacturing practices and how to implement them in the winery. And then we're going to take a break for questions. And then after that, we're going to switch gears a little bit. And though HACCP is not a requirement for wineries based on the FSMA, we're going to discuss the benefits of implementing a HACCP-like program not only for compliance, but for possibly improving wine quality. And then we'll give you a little information on what we're doing here at the Institute and how we're assisting wineries with our sanitation reviews to adhere to this law. So the big question is, what is the Food Safety Modernization Act, abbreviated the FSMA? Well, this was a law that was signed. This was a law that was established in 2011, and what it did was provide, it provided the first sweeping change to the food safety laws in 70 years. It allows the FDA to better protect public health by strengthening the food safety system, and the focus is now placed on prevention rather than reacting to a food safety issue. Through the law, the FDA was given key authorities and mandates, which we'll briefly discuss in the areas of prevention, inspection and compliance, response, imports, and enhanced partnerships. In the area of prevention, the law requires that food facilities establish mandatory preventative controls, meaning that they establish a program that will prevent food from being either adulterated by chemicals or infected by microbial contamination. This applies to all facilities that are required to register with the FDA. Luckily, though, alcoholic beverage production are exempt from some of the requirements within this mandate. In the area of prevention, the FDA also has to establish mandatory produce safety standards. So this would apply to the growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of produce, including grapes. But luckily, if produce goes to further commercial processing, they are exempt from adhering to these produce safety standards. This mandate also gives the FDA the authority to prevent intentional contamination. Under the area of prevention, Changes were also made to current good manufacturing practices. These changes will apply to the alcoholic beverage industry, and I'll get into what to expect from them and what these really mean a little bit later in the presentation. The FDA also is requiring food safety plans for all food facilities, and these are typically HACCP or HACCP-like plans, hazard assessment and critical control points. But this is another area where alcoholic beverage production is exempt. In the area of inspection and compliance, the main thing that changed here is the Food Safety Modernization Act mandated that there be an increase in inspection frequency. So all facilities will be inspected by 2018. And as part of this inspection, the FDA will be provided access to all records for facilities involving their food safety plans and implementation of those plans. And if you're making certain types of food that require additional testing for validation, this may have to be carried out by accredited laboratories. In the areas of response, this allows the FDA authority to perform mandatory recalls, administrative detention, suspending the registration of a facility, and it also charged the FDA with developing a program to better trace the distribution of a food product. This area also requires producers of high-risk foods to undergo additional record keeping. In the area of imports, the law requires that the FDA ensure the state that make an effort to ensure the safety of imported products, raw materials, and finished food products coming into the U.S. And they're doing this through importer accountability, third-party certification of high-risk food, voluntary qualified importer program, and the authority to deny entry. Basically what this means is importers of materials have to verify that their suppliers have adequate preventative controls that meet the basic U.S. food safety standards. And then the final part of the FSMA allows the FDA to have enhanced partnerships. This area not only mandates that the FDA provide better training for state and local facilities in the area of food safety and defense, but they have to come up with a plan for foreign governments and their industry to be trained in the U.S.'s food safety guidelines. It also allows the FDA to rely on state, local, and federal agencies to serve as agents of the FDA for inspections, otherwise they won't be able to meet their mandate for inspections. Now that was an overview of the law. What does it really mean for wineries? Because in general, wine is not usually considered a major food safety risk due to its low pH and high alcohol. It's highly unlikely that it will be contaminated by a human pathogen, but there is the possibility of adulteration and contamination from harmful chemicals and other substances. So there are parts of the law that do apply to wineries. While being exempt from the majority of it, they are not exempt from registration. But this is nothing new. Wineries have had to register, well, all food facilities have had to register since 2002 with the Bioterrorism Act. They are also subject to mandatory recalls and administrative detention. Now, I mentioned these earlier, but I didn't really get into what they are. Mandatory recalls are if the FDA deems your product unsafe and you do not voluntarily recall it, they will recall it for you. Administrative detention allows them to prevent the movement of your product. So basically, they will put a hold on your product and you're not allowed to ship or distribute it. We discussed import controls, and again, this is just if you're getting raw materials from outside, raw materials or finished products or additives from outside the U.S., it falls on you to make sure that that supplier is adhering to adequate preventative controls. Now, the big one is inspection authority. The FDA has always had inspection authority of wineries. Just the frequency of inspections was a lot less because it's considered a low-risk food. Now, we'll see that change because every facility has to be inspected by 2018. So every winery should expect that they will be inspected by the FDA. Now, in terms of FDA registration, you are required to register with the FDA if your facility engages in manufacturing and processing, packing, and holding. This is a registration that you renew every 2 years. This has been part of the law since 2002, so most wineries are aware of this. But another thing to keep in mind with registration is not only winemaking operations have to be registered, but wine bottling operations have to be, as well as mobile bottling operations. So if you're getting your wine bottled by a mobile operation, they have to be registered. Now we're going to get into the really what to expect from the inspection, because that's the more new aspect of this law, in that you'll see an increase in the frequency. Some wineries have never been inspected by the FDA, but we're going to focus on what you should expect and some key things to remember. Wineries are considered food plants, therefore they must register, and therefore they are subject to FDA inspection. Wine is an acid food, and therefore will be evaluated and inspected under the protocols for acid food. Food plants must follow good manufacturing practices. And that's what we're really going to get into, is discussing what good manufacturing practices are and how to implement them. And additionally, record keeping is expected. So when the inspector comes, he's going to expect to see good manufacturing practices and records. What good manufacturing, so the inspector is basically going to be, a big part of the inspection is going to be looking for compliance with good manufacturing practices. And what good manufacturing practices, abbreviated GMPs, and that's what I'll use for the remainder of the presentation, is it's a set of guidelines for practices and processes required for the safe manufacture of any product. They're the foundation for formal product quality and safety management. And the inspection criteria, the inspector will look at several areas within your facility to determine if you're adhering to GMPs. Now, as I break down each section into each section of personnel, the plants and the grounds, equipment, sanitary facilities and control, sanitary operations and process controls, look at your facility and ask yourself, am I doing this? It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal program, but are you taking measures to make sure that these things are happening throughout your winery? So when the inspector comes in and looks at good manufacturing practices for the criteria of personnel, they're going to be looking at, are all employees maintaining good personal hygiene, and are they being trained on how to do that to the company standards? Also, are your personnel trained on how to do their job with cursory knowledges of how to do the other jobs within that facility? They're going to be looking at your personnel's attire. Are there clean uniforms, and are they provided with protective equipment where necessary? Here I provided a table of the typical protective equipment, personal protective equipment that you would see in a winery. As you can see, it's things that will protect your eyes, like safety glasses or goggles, protecting your ears for hearing protection, either around machinery or on the bottom line, gloves for when dealing with cleaning chemicals or working, moving trash, that kind of thing. Are they wearing appropriate footwear? If they're operating machinery, is the machinery up? If they're operating mobile machinery, is it up to safety standards, including seat belts? They're also going to be looking at if your employees are wearing appropriate clothing in terms of, is it loose fitting? Could it get caught easily into the equipment? Are they wearing jewelry or fake nails that can fall into your product? They also want to make sure your personnel is adhering to all health and safety procedures, that they're being responsible for their work area and the cleanliness of it, and are the personnel free of open wounds and communicable infections? And if they do have an open wound, are the medical dressings secure? Nobody wants a Band-Aid in their wine, so that's what they're looking for there. Also, if your facility is having outside contractors come in, do you have a plan to inform those outside contractors of your rules and to make sure they adhere to them? So another area they look at are the plants and the surrounding grounds. And really what they're looking at here is, are your premises free of debris? Are there breeding grounds for pests? Is it generally neat? Is everything put away, or is there piles of garbage around? Basically that. They also are looking for adequate drainage, not only in the grounds, but also inside your plant. Standing water can be a breeding ground not only for insects and other pests, but also for microbial contamination. Do you have sufficient storage space for your equipment and materials? Are things lying out, or are things put away properly? Not only will they look at the condition of your facility in terms of the floors, walls, and ceilings, but they're going to look at whether or not it's made of a material that's easy to clean. Is your processing area separate from your area of production? What this means is, are you, when you're bringing grapes in to be crushed and pressed, is that separate from where you bottle? And if they're not separate, are they occurring at separate times? And what's the precautions that you take that contamination from the grapes is not getting into your bottled wine? They'll also look at the quality of the air. Is it dusty? Are your vents cleaned? Is dust being blown around in your facility? That kind of thing. Another one is they look to see if you're taking precautions to prevent pest infestations. And if you are, what are those measures and are they appropriate? They're going to look at your equipment and see if it's in good condition, relatively easy to clean, and in some cases easy to sanitize. And then they're going to look to see if the equipment is designed in such a way that it's appropriate to prevent contamination from lubricants, metal fragments, etc. So for example, your crusher, if the crusher's motor is not housed in such a way, the crusher's motor has to be housed in such a way that it prevents the lubricant from the motor of mixing with your grape product. And usually if you're buying quality equipment, this is not an issue. And is the equipment and the layout of your facility designed in such a way that all areas of the plant can be cleaned? If you have mobile equipment, can it be moved so all areas can be cleaned? If it's stationary equipment and it has to stay in there, can you clean around it appropriately? Sanitary facilities and controls focuses on water supply and plumbing and providing appropriate toilet and hand washing facilities. The main thing is, is your water supply adequate in both quantity and quality? So they're looking at the source of your water. Do you get enough water, and is it of appropriate quality? It also has to be the appropriate temperature and pressure for whatever you're using it for. You have to have an adequate sewage disposal system, a plumbing system that prevents contamination. Toilet facilities must be provided and maintained. In addition to that, hand washing and sanitizing facilities must be provided where appropriate. So in some cases, the sink that's in the bathroom will not necessarily meet that requirement. There might need to be additional hand washing stations. And all garbage must be stored properly. Now, sanitary operations is where you get into, are the actual practices you are carrying out sanitary? So they're looking at the facility is kept clean and in good physical repair, and this can be done through general maintenance and sanitation plans. Also, cleaning of the facility and equipment must be conducted in such a manner to avoid contamination of the product. What this means is when you're in the process of cleaning one tank, that you're not spraying either the sanitizer or the soap onto another tank and forgetting that you have to clean that. Or if you're pumping in a variable volume tank and you have the lid open, no one's spraying water or cleaning something next to it that could potentially get into that. A sanitation plan should be developed for your facility, and it should include methods on how to clean, how to sanitize, and in some cases sterilize. And these should be detailed methods and procedures, not only of how to carry out the process, but how to use the chemicals that are used in these processes. And these should be in the standard operating procedures for the winery. And if carried out properly, good sanitation practices and plans, they can limit the buildup of organic debris and prevent potential microbial contamination of your final product. Another thing the inspector is going to be looking for is whether or not your cleaning supplies are used in a safe and effective manner, and they're labeled properly, and you have proper documentation. Currently, that's MSDS's, but that system is shifting. But whatever the chemical supply, the documentation the chemical supplier sends with you, you want to keep it on record. They're going to be looking if the process areas are free of insects, rodents, and other pests. Pests are a big one for these types of inspections because they're generalized. The equipment they're also going to be looking for whether or not the equipment is sanitized at intervals frequently enough to avoid contamination of products. So what you want to do is develop a schedule and have that on hand to show the inspectors. Are you cleaning at a frequent enough level to prevent any issues? Process and controls deals with how you carry out a given process in the winery, and then how do you make sure it's effective. The first one that they look at is the responsibility of overall plant sanitation specifically assigned to an individual. And in this case, for a winery, you're looking at a winery sanitarian. And some people might ask, what's a winery sanitarian? Well, in an article Dr. DeMonaco wrote, The Importance of Cleaning and Winery Sanitation, he describes the characteristics of a good winery sanitarian. Now, this can be a current employee or someone that you hire special to do this. But they should have a basic understanding of the winemaking process. They should have some education in food processing sanitation. And it doesn't have to be formal, but at least a basic understanding. An ability to recognize that there is an issue or this is an unsanitary condition, and the necessary knowledge on how to correct that problem. They should be able to train other employees. They should have a basic knowledge of the federal, state, and local laws and how to implement them. And they should know what the environment should look like or what represents a sanitary environment. Then this person would conduct the in-house inspections at the appropriate time. They would make note of the conditions, feel comfortable talking with management about the conditions and corrective actions, and then working with key staff to carry out those corrective actions. Another big thing in process and controls is, are you carrying out your processes in a manner that would prevent microbial growth or chemical alteration? So you take a look at all the processes you're doing, and are they being carried out in a safe way? Also, if you're doing any testing, for chemical or microbial issues, are those procedures in place and used when necessary? And are the methods you're using to test these numbers adequate? The FDA inspector will be looking if you actually inspect your raw materials and ingredients to ensure that they are quality products before mixing them into your process. They're making sure you're only using additives approved for food. They want that you're using appropriate packaging and process materials. Also, here's a big one, that the end product needs to be properly coded, and you should have a record of where it came from and where it went. So do you know which batch was bottled in which lot and where it went, that kind of thing. Labels need to be in compliance. The TTB currently still regulates this for alcoholic beverages. So as it stands right now, if your label is approved by the TTB, it would pass the inspection compliance. Finished products need to be stored and shipped under conditions that prevent contamination and deterioration. So once you have your finished product and you go to ship it out, are you making sure that you're doing it in such a way that you're not changing that product before it gets to the consumer? So that's an overview of good manufacturing practices. And you ask yourself, how do I implement this in my winery? Well, the big thing is to train your employees. And if you set these as winery policies, make sure they're followed as policies. Developing a sanitation plan goes a long way to helping you achieve sanitary operations and processing controls. And you also want to validate the effectiveness of your sanitation plan. You want to make sure what you're doing is working. And the biggest thing is to keep good records. You want to keep records of when you clean, how you clean, and at what for how long. You want to keep a source of your raw materials. You also want to keep records of your product, where it came from, what it happened to it in the winery, and where it went. So to summarize the Food Safety Modernization Act and good manufacturing practices, because wineries are food plants, they must comply with certain aspects of the Food Safety Modernization Act. They are exempt from the majority of the regulations, but they have to comply with FDA inspections. They can be subjected to mandatory recalls and administrative detention, and they're subjected to import controls. GMPs are an important part of passing an FDA inspection, meaning the FDA inspector is going to look, are you adhering to these practices? And if you are you doing it properly? They are, because they're broad, they can be easily adopted and implemented by the winery. So right now we're going to take a short break for questions, if you have any at this time, and then we're going to switch gears a little bit.
Okay, so a few people are having some audio problems. I just want to recommend that you try running an audio check. Up at the top of your screen, there's a top bar. Try reading the audio test that's up there under the audio tab. With that, we do have one question, or a few questions actually. One is from Charles, who asks if you're going to cover the type and name of additives that are appropriate and allowed by the FDA.
In this presentation, I won't be covering the type and name of additives approved by the FDA, but the TTB does have a list of that available on their website. If possible, I may be able to get that link for you.
Okay, and if you can't, I welcome people to email me and ask me for the list, and Stephanie can provide it to me, and then I'll send it out to everyone.
Yes, that would probably work the best.
Okay, all right. Why don't we do that? If those of you who want that list, please send me an email. You should have it from the webinar email that went out, and then I'll send it out to anyone who wants it. So then we have another question from David asking if there are any good sample sanitation plans available.
There are several good sample sanitation plans available on the website. Basically, if you Google winery sanitation plan, you'll find several PowerPoints and several presentations with recommendations of what chemicals to use and how to carry out the process. The Iowa State Extension website does have an article on sanitation plans. I don't have a direct link available, but they're readily out there of plans for for small to medium-sized wineries.
Okay, and that's another thing. If you guys would like some specific examples, feel free to email me, and I'll work with Stephanie to get a list together.
Yes, I'd be happy to send a reference list out.
Okay, all right, we can do that. Jamie asks, the growing requirements of the FSMA, don't they apply to wineries and vineyards?
I'm sorry, that last one trailed off.
Okay, it's from Jamie asking, the growing requirements of the FSMA, don't they apply to wineries and vineyards?
Oh, you mean the good agricultural practices?
I guess.
Yeah, good agricultural practices do apply to vineyards. I did not discuss that in this presentation, but there are some instances where, say you're a winery that's also a vineyard, not only would you have to adhere to an FDA inspection of your winery, there could be a separate inspection to ensure you're using good agricultural practices in your vineyard. But as I pointed out earlier, when you're, the FDA is going to be setting produce levels for mandatory levels for safe produce. Well, mandatory practices for the production of produce. What they're looking at there is if the produce is going directly to the consumer or if it's going to be used in another commercial process. So the FDA still kind of treats them as separately. That okay, so as a winery, even though you're using your own grapes, because they're using for a commercial process, they have to adhere to that one standard. But as a vineyard producer, as the vineyard, you would have to adhere to good agricultural practices. Does that make sense?
I hope so. And then one final question. Kim asks if wineries are going to be inspected by an FDA agent or another agency or person acting on the FDA's behalf.
My understanding of that is if the FDA has, if the FDA has a suitable federal, local, or state authority that can come do the inspection, and they can't get an inspector out to the area, it would be somebody else. But it can be an inspector, or it could be local, state, or federal. It just depends on their scheduling and who they can send to the facility at the time. So someone up the street could be inspected by a state official, where someone right next door could be inspected by an FDA inspector.
Okay. That was all the questions, so I'm going to mute my microphone and let you keep going with your presentation.
Okay. Thank you guys for the really good questions, and we're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about HACCP. HACCP is Hazard Assessment and Critical Control Points, and we're going to talk about HACCP-like programs in the winery. And while these are not required for the alcoholic beverage industry by the FSMA, they are required for all other food production facilities. They are a good idea because not only do they allow you to comply with, basically you would go above and beyond to comply with the law, but it also can help you improve the quality, the overall quality of your wine. Because GMPs are general and they're the bare minimum. They're not industry specific, and while they give you the requirements, they don't tell you how to achieve these requirements. HACCP programs represents a how-to approach. You can, by analyzing the hazards and risks and formulating controls, you can assess your whole system. It allows you to answer the question, it's like, why am I cleaning and sanitizing this piece of equipment, and why am I doing it at this time point? What does it achieve for me? Why am I performing this chemical or microbial analysis? And what role does that test play in the overall wine quality? Why do I need these results? When do I need these results? What range should these results be in? And what do I do if they're outside the range? Where GMPs will just tell you it has to be this, this, and this, HACCPs will allow you to identify those and answer those questions. And because they're unique to your system, as the producer, you determine when, why, and how your wine should be evaluated by chemical, microbiological, and sensory analysis. This is a program where you get to decide. And it's also a program that doesn't have to just involve sanitation. It can be much broader than that. And like I said before, they're individualized. You get to set the parameters, you get to pick the controls. And if you set the parameter of, I'm looking at wine quality, overall wine quality, that is something that you or your consumers define. HACCP programs are 7-step programs that that break a process down into individual steps and then looks to identify critical control points. So, and then I'm going to break these down in the next couple of slides further. But basically, it's a 7-step program that you look at your process, you identify points within your process that could be of issue, you set limits for those points, you find a way to monitor those limits, you find a way to take corrective action where necessary, and you look at whether or not this process is working, and you keep records of everything. So the first step is to develop a flow diagram. Here is a very abbreviated flow diagram of basic winemaking. So you break down, and this includes all the steps that you would see in the process. So with that diagram, you go and you look at it and say, for each one of those steps, what are the potential areas that could have an adverse impact on the quality of my wine. Those areas are your critical control points, or the CCP of HACCP. What you want to do is you want to look at those CCPs and rank them. And they're ranked by what needs to be controlled at those points. And those are known as, those things that need to be controlled are called quality factors. Quality factors can be either physical or microbiological, or in some cases chemical. Physical is you're looking at, okay, there's cork pieces in my bottled wine. The corker is a critical control point. The quality factor is cork pieces in bottled wine. And then you want to, so you have your critical control point. You also need to establish protocols for how are you going to monitor these. And and all of this should be in your winery SOP. And then once you have identified your critical control points, you need to establish critical limits. Using, so you want to look at how important these hazards are to your overall quality, the overall quality of your product. And what a critical limit can be is a process fact. It's temperature at fermentation, agitation rates, cellar temperature, bottling temperature, that kind of thing. Measurements on the process of the wine, or measurements on a process or wine sample. How much oxygen is being introduced during bottling? How much oxygen is present throughout your process? If you're looking at wine sample, you're looking at VA, sulfur dioxide, alcohol, etc. It also can be a yes or no decision. These grapes I got shipped to me, 50% of them have rot. Do I keep them or do I discard them? That would be an example of a yes or no decision. And then for each one of these, in order to establish critical limits for each one of these parameters, you need to know your maximum and minimum values, your acceptable values, and for the type of analysis used to measure them, how accurate is it? Then the next step is to develop monitoring procedures. It's like, well, I have my critical control points. I identified what I need to look at those critical control points. I know what I want the limits to be. How do I go about monitoring those limits? So this is important that you have an accurate test for the items that you wish to measure. I use the example if you're making low sulfite-free wine, that at the end it has to have less than 10 parts per million SO2. Do you have a way to measure SO2? Do you have a way to measure accurately? During this section, you also have to establish it, when, where, and whom will be monitoring this aspect. Also, are you using a method that is acceptable for analyzing this, analyzing the measurement you want to look at? Is it an appropriate method? Is it a standard method? Then after you've found a way to monitor it, you have to be able to establish corrective actions. If everything is all set and it's within your set limits, then there's no corrective action taken. But if you have problem X in the winery, you will take action Y. So that's how you set a corrective action. For example, I give the example of nitrogen levels are too low in the juice. How will you correct this? First, you have to look at how do you've analyzed it. It's too low. What actions will you take to correct it? Another example is VA is above the legal limit. How will you handle this issue? Do you have steps to deal with this issue? Then you have to be able to verify and validate anything you're doing. So, is this control system that you just set up in the previous steps, is it working and is it being effective? To do this, you have to have record-keeping review. Also, if you're doing a lot of, while you're making the wine, if you're doing a lot of analysis methods, if you're doing a lot of monitoring methods, like looking at your alcohol levels throughout the process, is the method that you use to analyze the final product different from the monitoring method? This allows you to validate your monitoring method. Or you can also send send your product out for second-party analysis. What this does is validates your in-house methods. And then also you want to be communicating with your staff. Ask them if they think the program is working, if they think it's being effective. And at all points you want to look at, are you carrying the processes and the operations at your critical, are you carrying them out properly at your critical control points? The last part of HACCP-like plan is record keeping. As you saw with PMPs, it's important to keep records. You want documents for all procedures. You also want to note potential hazards to products and personnel. You need to record if you had to take any safety measures or corrective actions so you'll know what to do in the future. And if you're using a lot of instruments in your wine lab, make sure you keep the calibration records. That goes a long way to support validation and verification. And then you also, from time to time, you want to review these records to, again, validate and verify that your system is working. So that was an overview of a HACCP-like program. And what a HACCP program allows you to do is analyze the production dangers to dangers to product quality, stylistic deviation, and worker safety. So not only are you just looking at, am I making this safely, you're also looking at, am I maintaining the quality of my product? If I want it to be a certain style every time, am I deviating from that? And while these processes are being carried out, are my workers safe? HACCP-like programs also provide the wineries with a proactive method for identifying potential problems and what to do as a result. So it's not just, okay, this could be a potential problem. It's, here's a potential problem, and here's what you have to do to correct it. And if you have an established program like a HACCP program, you're dealing with all your compliance issues up front. Because if you have HACCP, you have good manufacturing practices, because good manufacturing practices are the cornerstone of a program like this. And there's a good probability if you have a program like this and you're monitoring everything at those points, that you're going to improve the general quality of your wine. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here again and talk about a little bit of what the Midwest Grapes and Wine Industry Institute here at Iowa State is doing to help the Iowa wineries in achieving good manufacturing practices and validating and verifying some of their sanitation methods. So we really focus on evaluating how they're doing at the process and control levels of good manufacturing and sanitary operations. And what I do for this is I use the FDA inspection report for good manufacturing practices as a guideline for establishing what I'm going to look at when I go to a winery and what areas am I going to test. And basically, what I really set out to do is evaluate the effectiveness of their current sanitation practices and the overall environment of the winery. I do a visual inspection, and then I also couple that with microbial testing and some chemical testing along. And these sanitation reviews would be used both in HACCP and GMP validation methods. Well, as validation methods for both HACCP and GMP programs. So some of the methods I use in a sanitation review is hygiene testing, so ATP bioluminescence, which is commonly used in the wine industry, where I look at where I take a swab of the surface and evaluate if there's viable microbial growth on it. And then based on that, I will do microbial swabbing and cleaning to identify whether or not the area is contaminated with microorganisms, indicating poor sanitation, or wine microorganisms that could lead to degradation of the product. I also look at chemical analysis of wine. Primarily, I focus on products of microbial contamination like high VA, the presence of acetaldehyde, and off aroma and flavor components. And based on these reviews, I'm going to give you a summary of some common winery sanitation issues. A lot of times I'll see contamination with lactobacillus, acetic acid bacteria, and wild yeast. The presence of these indicate that current sanitation methods may not be the most effective. and this is across the board, and if you go into any winery, you'll probably find microbial life like this. And it's whether or not it's getting into your wine. So based on what I found, I've come up with a few recommendations for areas to keep in mind when evaluating your current sanitation practices. It seems the bottling line is a big issue. So if you treat the bottling line as a critical control point and you look at bottling line contamination, this is typically caused by improper cleaning measures, either not the appropriate sanitizer or not the appropriate contact time, that kind of stuff, or cross-contamination, where it was cleaned, but then it got contaminated by things coming into it. The results of having a bottling line that is contaminated could result in instability in bottled wine. There are corrective actions you can take here. You can re-clean and sanitize the bottling line. And then a preventative action would be to monitor the bottling line after cleaning. And that'd be using something like the ATP testing or swabbing. Another big area where I see to be an issue is the fermenter transfer valve. Often wine will pool in this valve, and that allows microbial organisms to grow. Now, the corrective action for this one, this actually would rank, because this is at the fermenter. Remember I talked about ranking your quality factors? This is at the fermenter, and assuming you're using sterile bottling, this would not be as big an issue as contamination at the bottling line, because that would be in your final product. But this could cause off flavors and aroma in your wine if you have contaminants. We find that spraying the valve with alcohol thoroughly before and after use is the appropriate corrective action for this problem. So before you hook up a hose, or before you, or a transfer line, or before you open the valve to take a sample, make sure to spray it down with alcohol. And then after you use it, spray it down with alcohol, preventing that, that wine or juice to accumulate there and cause microbial growth. And you also want to monitor your fermentations or your stored wines for contamination. You want to keep an eye on it and make sure that, okay, did my practices work, or am I still seeing problems? So to summarize the entire presentation, I know we covered a lot today, and I'd like to thank you all for hanging in there. It's that wineries will have to comply with certain aspects of the Food Safety Modernization Act. This because they have to comply, they will be required to implement good manufacturing practices. And like I said, these don't necessarily have to be written programs. It's good if they are. They're easier to enforce if they are written down. But look at the list I gave you and look at your winery and see if you're adhering to good manufacturing practices. But remember, that's just a bare minimum coverage, where the HACCP-like programs will address compliance issue and potentially increase the general quality of your wine by having you aware of what's going on at every step and controlling what's happening at every step. Sanitation plans and testing the effectiveness of those plans through either reviews or internal audits will not only validate your processes, but it will also allow you to identify areas of improvement. And that is all I have for today, and I am more than happy to take your guys' questions. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, Stephanie, we do have a couple of questions, but before I jump into those, I want to ask everybody, before you sign out of the webinar session, please click on that link I just posted. It's to our post-webinar survey, and we really do value your input. So if you could go take that survey, I would really appreciate it. So Stephanie, we do have a question, a couple questions. One from RJ is asking if you know of any software that works well to keep control of all the recommendations.
Off the top of my head, I don't know of any commercial software. I know they do have some products out there for winery records. That would be another thing I could probably look into and send a link on.
Okay, that would be great. So if anybody wants any of this information that Stephanie's saying she can send me, please send me an email so that I can get it out to all of you. Then Tim asks, it's comments to the previous question on the growing standards in the FSMA. Well, you know what, Stephanie, this is a really long question, so I'm just going to copy and paste it into the chat pod right now. And, oh, did it go? There it goes. So I'm going to let you read that. I just posted. And I'll let everybody else read it too so that you know what she's answering.
Okay. To clarify, not all grapes are exempt from the process. With the regulations involving the alcoholic beverage industry and their input, like the FDA, since this law has been implemented, they've been getting a lot of input from the industry. The FDA does not specifically mandate that when, like the grape growing practice, I'm not talking about the grape growing practices, I'm focusing on when the winery gets the grapes. So upstream from there, they do have to adhere to the FDA's regulations for good agricultural practices, and depending on the purpose of the grapes, they would have to adhere to this produce safety regulations.
Okay, we have another question. A few people have asked if you'll be making your slides available as a PDF. So if you're okay with that, I'll save it as a PDF and post it on the project website. But if not, Stephanie, just let me know and it won't be posted. So we'll talk about that later. Mike asks, I assume ethyl alcohol is recommended for sanitation. What % alcohol is required?
I'm sorry, I assume ethyl alcohol is
recommended for sanitation, yes. And what percentage is required?
You can use 70%, but we recommend 90 proof.
Okay, and I'm going to apologize to everyone for this background noise you're getting. They're doing some work on the steam pipes in the building, and it's a little bit loud right now. Ken asks, is 70% isopropyl appropriate for the valve spray?
Yes.
Okay.
And you'll see that used a lot. 70% isopropyl you'll see used a lot.
Okay. And then Keith asks, is rinsing with a sulfite good enough?
It depends on your, well, the concentration of sulfite and the contact time. If say you're doing everything correctly, it should be adequate, but that's why I recommend the alcohol, because it's easier. You just spray it down with alcohol. But assuming that your concentration is known and it's appropriate and your contact time is appropriate, it could be okay. Without knowing more about the system, as far as I can say, is I would recommend the alcohol.
Okay, and then we have another question from Dennis saying that he thought 40% did better through cell wall penetration. I
have not heard that. Typically, I recommend 70% and above. Is it pure ethyl alcohol or like with it? 40% ethyl alcohol, correct?
I don't know. It's just that's all the question says is thought 40% did better through cell wall penetration. Dennis, if you have a follow-up, you can do that. So anyway, he says yes.
Okay. Based on my experience, I've never came across. I'm not saying it isn't out there, but I've never came across a recommendation for 40%.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Julie asks, will the FDA government inspectors be scheduled or surprise visits sometime between now and 2018?
They're not really putting that out there whether or not it would be like whether or not it's going to be a surprise or scheduled. I I believe in the past it has been a scheduled visit. I'm not 100% sure on that because they have to achieve so many of them by 2018. They are still looking for industry input on how they want this inspection to roll out. So they have started some, but I think their method is not established entirely yet.
Okay. Ken asks, would you not want to use ethyl alcohol because it smells like ethyl acetate?
I've never, well, you're not using a lot of ethyl alcohol, and for the most part, I've never noticed an ethyl acetate smell to ethyl alcohol, because it's just straight ethanol. But, like, when I say spray it, I mean, you want a few quick spurts, like 3 spurts from a spray bottle. It allows, you want to make sure it's clean and free of juice, and then you want to spray it. Okay, so you guys are all picturing the valve. You know how wine or juice can pool there? You want to spray it until it's clear of that, and spray it one more time, and then you're good to go. It ends up being like 5 or 6 sprays of the bottle. If it's clean of juice, then it ends up being 3 sprays. So, and that will evaporate. It's just you're making sure the surface is sanitary.
Okay. Tim commented that he believes that FDA inspections are usually unannounced and that some foreign firms are scheduled. So there's that. That's all the questions that we have right now. I would also, with that, I'd like to call everyone's attention to our upcoming webinars that we have scheduled. I'm excited about them and hope that everybody else is too. I also want to post a link to the survey again and encourage you to all go take that. And so I think we're done. It looks like everybody's questions got answered. Stephanie finished with a little bit of time to spare. So Stephanie, thank you very much for agreeing to do today's webinar. I think that everybody really enjoyed it and really learned a lot. And we really appreciate you. So with that, we're done. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys all for attending.